What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. After Sound here, bringing you Splinterlands content every single day. We also stream right here on this channel every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday morning, so come by and say hello. All right, guys, I want to talk about Wild format and why I think it should actually spin off into its own new game mode at some point in the future. Now, here's the thing. We all know about Wild and modern format, and this is something that was just born out of the fact that the game had expanded to a point where the expansion sets were getting pretty large, right? We went from 3 to 4 when we went from Untamed to Chaos Legion, and therefore it made sense to have, especially at the time in 2021, it made sense to have a format which would be primarily focused on newer players coming in, because that's what the majority of people, in the game were at the time, right? A bunch of people came in 2021 and didn't have all of the older cards. So this was somewhat of an organic evolution of Wild, and in my opinion, the organic evolution can and should continue to the point where Wild just spins off and becomes its own game mode in a sense. Now, what do I mean by that? I have a couple of rough ideas, but as usual, I'm just going to bring these to you guys to see, where you can poke holes in it, maybe add and expand onto it. But my main point here is the simple fact that at some point, Wild could and should be the format in which most of the players play, right? Modern is going to be the competitive landscape where, the players who are truly up to date on their collections and want to have all the newest stuff, they go in, they battle. There's not going to ever be as many players in Modern as there are in Wild, and therefore, Modern is just going to be this competitive landscape, whereas Wild, it's going to be anything goes. And when you have players like myself or players who are, from the Untamed or beta eras of this game, that don't necessarily want to buy every card and stay super competitive, but just be able to play and maybe even more casually play in Wild, then that is where the majority of players are going to go. And with this Wild season permit coming into effect, I think that's going to add a ton of value into the ecosystem over the long term, the more players participate in Wild. So the way that I can see this splitting off is at some point, right? At some point, even though it's new, I think that there's got to be a situation in which you earn Modern Glint and then you also earn Wild Glint to really separate out the formats. Now, why is this important? It's because at some point, I think that the rewards offered in Wild could be something fun and crazy, and maybe even subsidized by the DAO, right? Maybe we start giving away some of the packs, right? For that the DAO is holding on to. Maybe there's some kind of sponsorship or partnership deal that comes in and brings actual value and some kind of NFT or something that you could earn from the Glint shop with your Wild Glint, right? Maybe at some point, like, you're able to get access to certain promo cards or whatever the case is. And so this is where I'm saying, like, Wild is going to be more of like this fun league where anything goes, and Modern turns into more of a competitive league where the rewards are significantly higher, right? It's the same SPS being given out to both. But if we can have, SPS effectively be, part of the, or effectively like really take off in terms of like the flywheel, and be a good governance and reward token, meaning that it has, high and sustained value. I mean, the people winning like 30, 40 SPS per win right now in Modern, I mean, they're going to be happy. Like, let's get to a dream scenario here for a second, right? Where let's say SPS hits 50 cents, right? Which is, I mean, it's kind of outrageous to think about now, but let's just say 50 cents. I mean, if you're winning $20, right? 15, $20 per win, I mean, that's kind of insanity at that point, right? So Modern becomes really interesting, whereas Wild gets diluted significantly, even though you're going to get a lot of the low-level accounts out. There will be a competitive nature to it, but it's going to be much more open in the sense where it's just like, I can, maybe I can be competitive at Champ with the mainly Chaos Legion deck, or maybe not Champ, maybe like Diamond, right? And somebody similarly can be competitive when they have mostly Untamed cards, or if they have mostly beta cards, and whatever the case is, right? As more and more expansions come out, it's whatever collection you have based on whatever matches you have, and therefore it just becomes this own thing where people just go in, they have fun. It's a little bit more casual in nature, but the glint that you can that you earn from there can be used for really cool prizes. So that's kind of how I think through this. Now you can see, even with the battles that we have right now for Wild format versus Modern, Wild is significantly higher, meaning that with all the bots obviously draining a ton out of the reward pools, it's not that I expect that to continue, but as I said earlier, my thesis is that Wild is going to be where a lot of players play, whereas Modern is going to be where the most competitive play. And when we look at it through that lens, the pool is always going to be diluted significantly more in Wild, meaning that you just won't win as much SPS. So therefore, in order to incentivize people to participate in Wild, I think they can give out some really cool rewards. Now, that's not to say that they can't give out cool rewards in Modern as well. And this is where I'm thinking, like, we could get to a point where the formats diverge enough that it would become like a separate game mode where it's just like, okay, you get 24 energy per day, right? And I don't think we should ever get to a point. I know Matt's also backed this or said that, you know, he was not a fan of having there be Modern energy and Wild energy. It's just, this is the energy that you get to play. You can choose which game mode you like to participate in. Right now, it's which format you choose to participate in, but in the future, it could be whichever game mode you choose to participate in, right? And we really separate those out. And if there's another format added in, then, you know, that could add in terms of value and doing something different with that. Now, obviously, you know, Soul Keep is actually a new and different kind of game mode. It takes different energy and all that. But if the team were ever to expand further within the core gameplay, right? So talking about not necessarily land, but, you know, all the different game mode ideas that have been floated out there in the past, whether it's tournaments or something, energy could play a role in that. You could have Glint play a role in that and have it all be somewhat connected, either to Modern, to Wild, or be its own thing. But ultimately, you know, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. The main point that I'm trying to make is that I do believe that Wild at some point, I think, and there's no rush on this, right? So I'm not saying that it needs to happen tomorrow or this year or next year. I'm just saying at some point I think it would make sense to move Wild into its own game mode. Have it be so vastly different from Modern that people just go in because they want to have fun. People who play Modern competitively also buy the season pass in Wild and maybe even buy energy because it's just like, oh, well, I want to get what, you know, what's going on in Wild. And again, so much of this comes down to the season pass, right? Because you are paying in, right? Because you are paying into the ecosystem, you have the opportunity to get some really cool prizes. And whether that's, you know, maybe some jackpot chests, which I know we have now, but maybe those jackpot chests are filled with even more in the future, or something that the team gives out, or NFTs, tokens, whatever it ends up being, there's some value there, right? Versus what Modern is, where, yes, you're still kind of adding value to the ecosystem by buying all the packs, by buying all the cards that you need for the two current sets, and you're rewarded for that by getting way higher, you know, SPS in terms of the wins that you get. Now, will that play out perfectly? No, not necessarily, right? I just think that Wild by default is always going to have more players. That doesn't mean that that will always be the case, but we've seen that so far, and I think we'll continue to see that in the future if the prices of sets continues to be, you know, very significantly high as they release in the future. But again, like I said, I'm getting outside the scope of this video. My whole point was that as we move forward, Wild can really come into its own as something and some place where everybody wants to play. And so therefore it becomes its own game mode, even though it's not really a different game mode. It's like all the people who are playing in Modern right now for the rewards, if you put cool stuff in Wild, if you put cool, you know, rewards and Glint and all that, and make it available for Wild, or even just like leaderboards, I think you're going to have the top players want to chase both. And in that way, as long as the earnings are good, and again, I mean, everything in this game depends on whether the earnings are good or not. So I'm going to make the assumption that the earnings are good. As long as the earnings are good, you get people participating in both and treating them as separate game modes. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That is all I have for you guys in this video. Otherwise, I will catch you all in the next one and see you around the game. Take care.